Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. There's a couple of problems existing in the country today. People are very, very frightened. There's a big concern and panic and a bit of hysteria over a virus. And also the markets at this very same time seems to be falling apart. Although, the market was going to fall apart anyway, but people have connected this because I think the people who don't want to be blamed for the bubble, they don't want to be blamed for the bursting of the bubble, so they say it must be this virus that caused all this trouble. But I think we're on pretty strong record about talking about the formation of the financial bubble and the prediction that the bubbles don't last and they collapse. But they've come together now, and a question is being raised because a lot of people who haven't followed it closely, they say, well, maybe there's a collusion, maybe they're faking a little bit, maybe they're using the viral infection, the coronavirus infection, as an excuse and doing it purposely to deflect from it. And there may or may not be a little bit of that because they're making use of a crisis. But both are very serious, not so much that we couldn't get by a bursting of a bubble if we resorted to sound economic policy, then there wouldn't be much of a problem. We're not on the verge of doing that. And also a virus that is not nearly as bad as some people portray it to be. I mean, I believe that we could handle, the coronavirus without the amount of fear that's going on. I mean, the whole country's closing down. The stores are being stripped. It's sort of like what we witness on the coast when a hurricane's coming in. Well, it sounds to me like people believe there's a hurricane of death and destruction coming from the virus, not from the financial situation. I think if I had to compare the two, I think the greater threat to our country and to our liberties is really the financial bubble that has burst, and now people are trying to sort it out, and we'll talk about that, Chris, a little bit about why we're not so optimistic that the Jim Cramers of the world are going to sort this out for us and provide the answer to the Fed's mischief in the monetary system. And Jim Cramer made a name for himself during the last crisis because he was very, very critical and went on a rant and went after Bernanke, and he's doing the same thing now. But I don't see too much of an improvement on the policies that created this monster coming from the same people with an answer to the problem. Because if inflation of the monetary policy, of the monetary system, and the lower than market interest rates are the problem, you can hardly solve the problem with more of the same thing that caused it to begin with. So I think that the philosophy of Jim Cramer, unfortunately, may be prevailing. They said that when he went on a critical rant this time around, I think he had a call from the White House shortly thereafter, and some of the proposals now, boy, they're very similar. And I get to thinking, how did they know about this? Well, it's because they don't believe in sound money, and they all believe in mischief. And when they get into trouble, they think the only thing we can do, lower the interest rates, print more money, and spend more money. So I think that's where we are today, and I don't think that the monetary policy and recommendations from Jim Cramer will help us very much.
That's right, Dr. Paul, and our longtime viewers, they know from watching our previous shows that the whole time up, while Trump was touting the greatest economy ever, we're saying, no, it's not, and keep your eyes on the Fed, because when this comes down, there's going to be blame elsewhere. And there just happened to be a pin around called coronavirus, and you still cannot take your eyes off the Fed, no matter what. You can't let them hide behind viruses, hurricanes, earthquakes, wars. You can't let them hide. They're responsible. And they're acting exactly as you would think they would. More stimulus, more stimulus. And you hear, well, Jim Cramer is blaming the Fed, and Trump is tweeting he's blaming the Fed. No, they're not blaming the Fed. They're encouraging the Fed. They want more counterfeiting at faster rates. The Fed is not counterfeiting enough. And like Dr. Paul just said, more of the disease cannot be the cure. If the disease is counterfeiting money, which creates all these distortions, malinvestments, and bubbles that have to burst, it would be insane to think that that is the cure, to do more of it. But at this point, that's what we're getting. We see that 1.5 trillion is going to be pumped into the markets, so we can expect even more crises in the future.
Yes, and we have these two going on. The crisis dealing with the coronavirus is, I think, the treatment is going to be more deadly than the disease, just as the lack of the proper treatment for the financial mess we're in it just compounds the whole effort. But people think maybe there's a coordination, a collusion between the two groups and work on this, because they're both advocating more government in the wrong way, as far as I'm concerned, more spending. But the whole thing is there is a bit of a collusion, but I don't believe all the leaders and all these organizations and all the people in the country get together and start strategizing. Because I think the strategy has long been available to them because they've all learned it. And it's called authoritarianism. Authoritarianism in contradiction to a free market and free sound money. That is what they reject. So the authoritarians will make use of a crisis like coronavirus. The state will take advantage of this. The people who believe in the state, they literally think this is an advantage. Just like after 9/11, when a crisis comes along, this gives us an advantage. And just remember, immediately after 9/11, the people who had planned the Patriot Act gave them an opportunity. So the people who are destined to persist with their determination to use their power and make the government bigger, and they'll say, well, that's what China's doing. But they don't have a monopoly on this, and I think we do the same thing. And I think as we talk, even on this program, that everything proposed so far is enhancing the power of the state, and it's the effort to do that and refusing to look at the real problem. And of course, the problem is the Fed when it comes to the biggest problem that we have right now and the collapse of the system. And that hasn't finished yet. That hasn't even come close. There's a lot of unwinding to do because as the people who believe in authoritarianism and funny money, they want more and more and more and think they can cure it. And they've gotten out of recessions at times for this. But I think this is different. This is what we've been talking about. Austrian economists have been talking about it, that there's a limit. Where do you go on interest rates when they're zero? And where do you go when you're in so much debt that you can't pile on more debt? So it will continue to happen, and the effort will be made, and they're going to ignore what is necessary. So yes, it's going to be a real tough position to reverse the attitudes that have been preached to the people, especially through our universities, through 99%, maybe 98% of everybody in Washington actually believe this stuff. They've been taught the same thing. So this crisis is going to build, and the combination of the two, the crisis over coronavirus and with the Fed, Corona people think, well, we need more money. At this very time, they're talking about a lot more money, even though they passed over already an $8 billion bill. That used to be a lot of money, but not now. But they're going to be doing it, and the printing machines are running. The announcement, and I think the reason why the stock market has perked up a little bit, are the massive promises of more monetary stimulus. I mean, we have a chart. We want to show you what it is, because yesterday, the day before, there was the promise by the monetary authorities that we will really make a lot of money available in the repo market. And take a look at that. That's the history of it. And that last line is the promise, and that says $1 trillion. But actually, the promise is 1.5. Oh no, that's 1.52. But some say that when you work this out, and what's written between the lines is a promise unlimited, and it will be. I mean, if they need the helicopters, they're going to get it. But we're getting awfully close to that. But these are bailouts. These are QEs, and they said that we won't ever call it QEs but they're admitting that it is a QE, and they're really preaching the gospel that the Fed has to start buying stocks of all companies to make sure the stock markets stay up. And of course, that's been their goal anyway. It's supposed to be stable prices and high employment rate, but really the main reason for the Fed, especially in the last several decades or longer, was to keep the stock market up and keep this bond market people happy, borrowing money endlessly, and making sure, which is the real evil, is that governments can spend whatever they want. We spend for various reasons, and there's a collusion between those who like welfare spending and those who like warfare spending. It's all welfareism. It's all special interest money, and therefore they keep spending. Deficits don't matter. We've been told that enough time. So as long as you have the monetary authorities willing to print money, and our executive branch of government in the last 3 years have not been bashful about printing money, and they haven't been bashful about spending money, but they're going to accelerate it. And that's where the big question is how much confidence can they restore? And I would say the odds are very, very slim that with the system we have now, the confidence will be restored, and added on top of the lack of confidence in the financial system, we have all the fear-mongering going on with the end of the world, with a viral infection, that some credible people, if you look around, you can find some credible experts in this field that can describe this in a little different manner than 10 times worse than influenza. And yet, we're talking about a couple thousand deaths, which is horrible, compared to 50,000 deaths from influenza. Nobody talks about that. So when it is put in perspective, the fear is way out of proportion to the danger. But, that's a dangerous thing to say, because they say, you don't have any credibility left. I thought you were a doctor. I thought you were a good politician. And you're telling people not to worry too much. Well, no, be concerned, but don't get hysterical about it. Don't go and think that, well, if we spend more money and store up on toilet paper, it's going to be help, and we're going to do better. But it's panic, if there ever was one, and that's what's happening in the financial markets too. And the money suppliers, the Federal Reserve, they're panicking too, because they won't admit they created this. They won't admit they're wrong, and all they admit to is, well, when you have trouble, you lower interest rates and you spend more money.
Yeah, Dr. Paul, and as everyone should know, you cannot make good decisions when you're hysterical and panicking. And on the flip side, politicians like that when people are hysterical, because that's when they could make their craziest proposals and get away with it. So it's always good, no matter what, to, as best you can, not panic. But you put up that chart, Dr. Paul, and it just shows how crazy the inflation is, and God only knows what that's going to do with the value of the money in our wallets. And it's funny, because Ben Bernanke said that QE was a temporary emergency measure. Well, apparently it's not temporary. It looks to be permanent. And yesterday I saw that President Trump said that the market's going to be just fine. Well, the market may rise. We just see all this funny money that's going to be flooding in. But, because of the way the markets work, bear market rallies are the ultimate head fakes, and they're very, very strong. So I wouldn't be surprised, I'm not saying it's going to happen, that we may see the biggest up day in stock market history. But does that mean that the market is fine? I would say no, because the underlying problem has not been addressed. They're just papering over, making the illusion that everything is fine. And because of this pumping of 1.5 trillion, we're going to have a much, much bigger problem in the future.
Right. In the 1970s, the financial breakdown after the breakdown of Bretton Woods was interesting, because there was always an argument going on. It was steady, not as prevalent as it is today, but becoming more prevalent today. And that is the discussion about, are we going to have deflation or are we going to have inflation? We actually had deflation during the Depression. The dollar actually went up in purchasing power, and the money supply shrunk. Of course, they had a lot of other policy which prevented the ending of the Depression. But right now, the word deflation is creeping in. The deflation is something that comes naturally because there's too much debt in a system like what we have, when we just print money and run up debt, and we don't depend on savings. We depend on low interest rates coming out of a computer. And but if it came from savings, when savings go up, interest rates go down, investments occur. We don't have that. We don't have the guide. But people are saying, well, there's bankruptcies going, there's liquidation here, and the market is very, very powerful. If you just had a hands-off position like they did in 1921s, there would be deflation, but it would be over in a year, and the problems would be solved. That's not going to happen. It's not politically feasible to do that. So there will be deflation. You can pick out items that there's deflation here, but true deflation has to deal with the money supply, and the money supply would have to shrink. Debt shrinks because there is some liquidation, but the actual money supply, look at, we have the wiping out of some debt. At the same time, that chart we showed shows how fast and how willing they are to just inflate, and that's what they will do. So I think what we end up with it now, evidence, there's parts of our economy where debt is being liquidated and it sort of has deflation, but not in the true sense of the word. In the true sense of the word, you'd have to have the shrinkage of the money supply and an increase in the purchasing power of the money. And that's not going to happen. The printing presses will continue to run. So even though the CPI is not going up like it could have and might, in the future, there's still a lot of inflation. The inflation under this last 10 years has gone into stocks and has gone into bonds, which we've talked about, and that's why we could predict that there was a stock market bubble. So the inflation is there, and it will continue. So I think the long-term battle between inflation versus deflation will be deflation will deflate some debt, and the market will try to win out, but the inflationists will win the battle and finally destroy the system. But the dollar's going to hang on for a good while yet because there's not many other options to go to. And there's a lot of manipulation that can occur in a precious metals market, because the one thing that they cannot allow to happen is the price of gold to go up, because that discredits the money managers. And ultimately, people will resort to things of real value, and yet I believe the inflation is going to rule until the whole thing collapses. Until then, we are going to be forced into having monetary reform, because there's so many articles now in the ordinary media, the regular media, say the Fed has lost control. Well, the only control they ever had was to destroy the money and to inflate the system and fool people, run up debt and malinvestment, finance bad government. This is the whole thing. So the evidence has been there. So right now, it's for me, I believe that the inflation will continue and get worse until the market demands monetary reform.
Right, Dr. Paul. I'll finish up by talking about the big picture philosophy of government. Around 1900, America changed for the worse. The ideas were brewing before that, but they were implemented starting around 1900, where individual liberty was getting tossed aside, and the philosophy of government intervention was adopted, full stop. And there was no limits. Government intervention into everything. And none of us, we weren't alive back then. We didn't have a choice. We're seeing the results of it. And the results are that this philosophy is busted completely. We have failed wars. Dr. Paul talks about it 4 days a week with Daniel. And what do? Start more wars. They have a name for it, endless wars. We have a failed welfare system where 50% of America is dependent on the other 50%. And we have politicians that are offering free stuff that they have no way of rationally being able to follow through on. And finally, we have the failed monetary system, the Federal Reserve. And what do we have? Calls for more counterfeit. This is a busted philosophy where continually doing the wrong thing is the only option that anybody has. And while we may not have had a say in this, we do have a say in what comes after this. And we say that it should go back to individual liberty. Wouldn't it be better to have money that doesn't decrease in value while it sits in your wallet because of some central bankers, or endless wars, or government intervention into our intimate lives, everything that's personal, that all has to come to an end. And we do have a say, and hopefully we could swing the pendulum back towards liberty.
Very, very good, Chris. And you touched on some very important points that I'm going to follow up on. And you mentioned, rightly so, about people believing stuff is for free. Every time you hear this from the campaign people, these promises of trillions of dollars, and it's going to be free, free this, free that, free that. But if you said the right words and couched them in terms of morality, it would be nothing is for free, and you want to give people stuff. Where do you get it? And I would say you steal it. And that's wrong. You can't do it as an individual. Why would you assume that if you want to give so much stuff to people, you have to steal it from people? And they say, no, we're not going to outrightly steal from it, except from the very rich. Rich people don't deserve to live. They deserve to be taxed. So they argue that case, but it's really not free. They can use the printing press. We print, our government prints, the Fed accommodates, they print money, they devalue the currency. Some people benefit, other people suffer. The middle class gets wiped out. So there is a payment, and they have to pay the bill. So I think, at times we can argue the economic issues, and we always should, but they don't seem to pay much attention to the impracticality of the philosophy we follow. But I think that people should be open to this whole idea of morality. This type of system, the fiat system, the Federal Reserve System, is immoral. It's based on theft. It's based on fraud. It's based on counterfeiting, and it doesn't work. Only for a while. The saving grace for these many years since we've had a Fed has been the fact that we have had a great country, and it was built on and it maintained some basic principles of the free market. Property rights and incentives and taxation that wasn't totally destructive. And this has been very beneficial, and it compensated for these mistakes. But that's coming to an end, and the morality argument should become stronger and stronger if you point out that the people at the Fed, the people in the Congress, the President, and the Federal, they're all steal. They have to steal if they give anything. Just think of the promises now of the trillions of dollars that are being passed out. This whole thing now, they just passed, what we mentioned was this $1.5 trillion of promise of bailouts in the repo market. Well, where did they get the money? The Constitution says, you can't spend any money unless it's been properly authorized and appropriated. Well, nobody did that with the trillions they spent, during 2008 and 9. But they say, yeah, but it worked. But we saved the world. No, you really didn't. You just counterfeited it, and you distorted it. You stole from some and the other, and you borrowed it. And the whole country is facing now a moral and a financial bankruptcy. And throw that in with a system of medical economics and all, and come up with a virus and have the politicians and the bureaucrats and the drug companies running our medical system. You shouldn't expect that to help us either. But I think it should be put more in moral terms. It's, the simple thing is the founders knew about all this. They had runaway inflation. And they said that the answer to this is you can't print paper money, and you have to use gold and silver as legal tender. And they quit worrying about that. Totally eliminated any relationship in 1971. So the immediate crisis has been building for a long time, but it really accelerated this in 71. And just look at the charts of the accumulation of debt. Our country has tolerated debt. We've had increase in production. That helps hide the problem. But now that the economy is in shambles, all it's doing is contracting. And we need some, new old-fashioned ideas. We need to talk about property rights and sound money and limited government and personal choices. But that is not on the table. It's Pelosi arguing with the Republicans. How much money are we going to spend? And in spite of this getting through these billions of dollars, they're always playing political games. I'm going to sneak this in for my special interest groups, but I tell you what, it'll be limited, and that's why the country's in turmoil right now, is the handwriting is on the wall. People know it's coming. People know that these ideas are failing. And the best part of it all is they're starting to realize that what we should have is a lot more freedom, not a lot more collusion of the authoritarians to run our lives and run our economy and think they can run the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.